In this video, we're going to take a look at nested loops, continuing my series on Node.js and JavaScript for complete beginners. So a nested loop is a loop within a loop, and we can use a nested loop to visit each element in a 2D array, one after the other. Let's start with use strict as usual. And I'm going to copy the 2D array that I created in the last video. So I'm going to copy this animal table. So I've got let animal table equal, and I've set this variable equal to a two-dimensional array. So an array where each element is itself an array. And the challenge is, the challenge that we're going to do is, can we visit each of these items in turn, either setting them or outputting them with console.log. So how would we use a for loop to access these two inner arrays? So the two elements in this outer array here. Well, we could do it like this. For let I equals 0, I less than animal table.length. So the length of it is 2, and I plus plus. And then we can just output console.log animal table and I. So if we run this code, we are visiting the two elements of this sort of outer array. That's element 0 and element 1. Element at index 0, element at index 1, and we're outputting them here. But each of those elements is itself an array. Let's maybe get each element in a variable. So I'm going to say let row equal animal table I, like this. So now I'm this variable row, I'm setting first to that, and then when the loop goes around again, it gets set to this. So row is an array, and we can actually iterate over row using another loop. So I can write for let. Now we can't use the name I again here. The scope of this I variable, in other words, the area where it exists, is basically from here to here. So anywhere within there, we can't declare another variable called I. We could do afterwards, but within here we can't. So let's give this another name like J. I'm going to set J equal to 0. We're going to keep looping while J is less than row.length. And we're going to say J++. And then here we can write console.log. Let's output I and J so we can see what they are. And then I'm going to write row J. Take a look. So now we've got all the elements within this 2D array, dog, cat, giraffe, element, rhino. And you can see that the values of I and J are taking, well, all the values that we need them to. So we've got row 0, column 0 is dog, row 0, column 1 is cat, row 1, column 0 is giraffe, row 1, column 1 elephant, and row 1, so this one, column 2, which is that rhino, is rhino. We could also set the values in the array if we wanted, like this. So if I had another one of these, I could set each element in turn. And JavaScript is weakly typed, so we could even set them to numbers. You know, we could do what we want with them, really. We could say, for example, let's say row J equals I times J. See what that does. So we had strings in this 2D array. We're changing them all to numbers, where each number is equal to the row index times the column index. And then we get this sort of strange looking table here. So the point that I want to make there is really just that we can change the elements in the array via this mechanism as well as accessing them. Let's set them all to hello. And then they're all hello. But anyway, let's comment that out. So if you're a complete beginner, especially, or any sort of beginner, you need to practice this. So ideally try to get to the point where you can define, let's just move that down a bit actually, move it out of the way, there we go, with Alt or Option and down arrow. So you want to get to the point ideally where you can write this out from memory, not this exact code, but so first practice this, type it out, get it working, and then see if you can, without referring to other code, after a bit of practice, because at first you will probably need to refer to this code or other code examples, see if you can eventually get to a point where you can declare a 2D array and iterate through it using a nested loop. Incidentally, we could also write, here we could write animal table I j, and here we could write animal table I, and then we don't need this. So that's another way to do it. Let's try that. So you can see that works as well. I'm going to just copy that and then just undo, because I wanted to show you this way first, because I think it's sort of simpler and it makes it clearer what's going on. I'll put this in a comment, and you can find this on github.com/caveofprogramming and my Node.js public repository if you want to browse the code there. So ideally get to the point where you can do it from memory. If you get bored and get sick of it, just move on to something else. Eventually, with practice, you'll be able to do this sort of thing, and it'll seem clear to you. It just takes some practice. I don't think it's very helpful to make notes. You just need to practice it, type it, get used to typing this sort of thing, really. And in fact, after you've typed things a few times, I find it's a lot easier to understand them than to do that the other way around. In other words, it's a lot easier to type stuff and then understand it than it is to understand stuff and then type. But typing stuff out and getting it working is vital to the process of learning with programming, absolutely vital. So worth trying this out. I'll give you an exercise with this, I think, probably in the next video, possibly. But for now, this is just enough in itself. So do try this out and see how you get on. Until next time, happy coding. Continuing my free course on Node.js and JavaScript for complete beginners. In this video, we're going to take a look at control characters, and we're going to see how we can write stuff to the console without creating new lines, which is what happens when we use console.log. And I'm inserting this at this point in the course because in the next video I want to give you an exercise that will bring together a fair bit of what we've seen so far in the course. But to complete that exercise, you're going to need a bit more information. So let's take a look at it. First of all, I'm going to start all my scripts as usual with use strict. Now, if I write console.log here and output, for example, hello, what does this actually do? It actually outputs hello, and then afterwards it creates a new line character. So if we run this, let's run node control characters.js, which is my file. Try again. I hit the wrong button there. No. Now I've brought back the same command that was wrong. What I want is this. Okay. So if you look at what's happening here, we're outputting the text hello. And then you see that the prompt of my terminal appears again on the next line. And that's because console.log actually outputs what we call a new line character after any text that it outputs, meaning the next stuff you output is going to appear on the next line. We can maybe see that more clearly if we output two of them, and then if I run this script, you can see they're coming out on separate lines, and that's because we write hello, and then there's an invisible non-printing new line character after hello, and that causes the next hello to come out on the next line, and that has a new line character after it as well. And that means that my prompt character reappears on the next line after that. So these new line characters, they don't print, they're non-printing characters, they don't display a symbol to you, but they cause the next stuff you output to appear on the next line. And we can actually output those explicitly ourselves. Let's take a look. So I'll maybe comment this out with a multi-line comment, which is /* and then */. So that's a multi-line comment, and it means that this is interpreted just as a comment and not as stuff to actually execute. So let's write console.log, and we'll have a string. Let's write hi, and then I'm going to put \n hi again, like this. So \n is a non-printing character. It gets translated to a new line character. We have to have a backslash. This is called a backslash, whereas this would be called a /. And it's important that we have a backslash here. So this means output hi, then create a new line character. In other words, go to the next line, and then output hi again. And then console.log automatically outputs a new line anyway after the stuff it's printed. So there'll be another new line after this second hi. Let's try this. And we get hi hi on 2 different lines. We can also use \t. By the way, I don't have a semicolon here. JavaScript is designed to be pretty flexible in many ways. It often lets you get away without putting semicolons at the ends of lines, but you should put them in. It's good practice, I would say. In other words, it's best practice. It's what you should really do, because sometimes your code won't work without these new lines. Let's try something else. So this time I'm going to write, let's write hello, hello, and this time I'll separate them with a tab character. Let's run this. So a tab character is like a sort of long space, basically. And we've got a sort of gap between these 2 hellos. And that's been created by this non-printing tab character, which we can create by using \t within a string. And a good thing about tabs is that they help you line things up. They sort of move things to the next tab position, or that's often what they do. Other times they're basically equivalent to typically 4 spaces, or sometimes 2 spaces or whatever. So if I output console.log and we have cat/t, dog/t, mouse, and then on the next line we have maybe apple and orange and banana, then we can see our output is lined up. And as long as the strings aren't too long, typically you'll get lined up output. There's no real guarantee about it, but in this case it's worked. So tabs are quite good often for lining things up like this. Now, what if we want to output some text and we don't want a new line after it? Because console.log will always add a new line after we've finished outputting our text, whether it contains new lines or whatever itself or not. So even just console.log by itself will create a new line. So let's write console.log with empty brackets. And you can see here that after the last output and before my prompt is a blank line now. And that's just been created by this console.log. But sometimes we don't want that. So if we don't want it, we can use process. Let's press S, because otherwise I think my autocomplete is going to unhelpfully mess this up. This is Visual Studio Code I'm using here. So if you write process.standardout.write, and I write, let's say, let's write lion. And then let's write something else with process.standardout.write, like tiger. and you'll be able to see the difference. So this is again is just a way of writing to the console, but the results here are a bit different to console.log. So if I run this now, we can see we've got lion and then tiger, and process.standardout.write does not create any new line after it. So the next output that I do will be coming out right after the last input. And sometimes that is very helpful. Console.log is really intended for debugging. So it was originally implemented in browsers, and typically you have development tools in your browser that you can activate somehow. And those contain a JavaScript console. And console.log, if you run JavaScript in a browser, which we'll look at later in this course, will output stuff to the developer console to help you debug JavaScript that's running in browsers. But here we're just using it on a command line with the Node.js interpreter, and there it works similarly to how it does in a browser, and it outputs text and then a new line after it. Now process.standardout.write, you don't need to know what this is in order to use it. We're going to cover concepts that you need to know to understand this more later on. But briefly, so process and standard out are both objects. We call them objects. Process is actually I believe standard out is anyway, must be. Process is actually an implicit object. So it's an object we say that's available to us when we write Node.js programs. And again, you don't need to know what that is, but we call it an object basically. Write is a method. In other words, it's a function or subroutine, a collection of statements that is attached to an object, in this case the standard out object. And this standard out object lets us write to what we call the standard output stream. So we've got standard out and standard in. And standard out typically kind of represents a console. So we can call standard out it's a kind of stream. It's like an output stream. So rather than a stream of water, let's say, it's a stream of data, and we can write things to it. We can write data to it, and then it will usually appear on the console. So you don't need to know that to actually use it, though. That's just to begin to get you used to some sort of ideas and terminology that we'll look at later. So you can use control characters if, in strings that you're going to write with process.standardout as well. Like if I were to put, for example, /t or /n there, you'll see the results of it. Let's put /t after lion and /n after tiger. And if we actually output this, then we've got lion and then a tab character, and then after tiger there's a new line, so that my console prompt is reappearing on the next line now. If you want to output numbers with process.standardout.write, there's a bit of a twist. So let's try that. Let's have a variable, let's say. So let's say let value equal 7. So we've got I've declared a variable called value, and I've initialized it to the value 7. And I'll use process.standardout.write, and we'll output value. What does this do? Let's run it. In fact, it gives me a error trace or stack trace. So console.log, because it's intended for debugging, in many ways it's very flexible. It will output numbers, it will output all kinds of things. Process.standardout.write is in many ways less flexible. It won't output numbers, it will only output strings. So this error here, if we look at the top of it, actually says the chunk argument must be one of type string or buffer. It's not liking the fact that this is a number. But we can convert a variable that refers to a number, we can convert it to a string using the toString method. And that looks like this. If I write value, so still within these round brackets of write, if I write value.to.toString, and let's put empty round brackets in there, because this is actually a method itself, then that actually works. Let's try it. and now it works, and we've got 7 there. If I wanted to get this single line to have a new line after it, well, I could just use console.log, but you can concatenate strings together as well. So here I could write plus, and I could have a string that only contains a new line, for example, and that would create a new line afterwards. Now you can see my prompt is now coming out on the line after that 7. Okay, so we're going to be using these ideas, or at least some of them, probably all of what we've seen here, in the exercise that I'll give you in the next video. So the thing to do if you are a beginner is practice this, try all of this stuff, try process.standardout.write, try writing numbers with it as well as strings, and try embedding control characters \t and \n within your strings and see what it does. Check that you get the idea of all this and you can use it to sort of arrange text on the screen, and then I'll give you an exercise in the next video. So until next time, happy coding.